Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Tensions between the US and China appear to ease as Trump cuts tariffs and gives his meeting with President Xi a 12 out of 10. Meanwhile, Trump orders the US military to resume testing of nuclear weapons in order to keep up with countries like Russia and China. Exit polls predict Rob Jetten, who's the leader of the Dutch centrist Liberal Party D66, is on track to become the next Prime Minister of the Netherlands. 5 more people have been arrested in connection with the Louvre jewellery heist during multiple raids across Paris. China and the US have agreed to a 1-year trade truce following talks between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. The two leaders agreed to roll back export controls and ease other trade barriers. The meeting marked the end of a World War tour of Asia for the US president, where he negotiated trade breakthroughs with South Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asian nations as well. Patrick Falk reports.
The build-up to the talks in the South Korean port city of Busan had been massive. Ties between the world's two biggest superpowers were increasingly strained in recent months. But there was optimism. The fact that Trump and Xi agreed to this face-to-face meant there'd be at least some breakthrough.
Thank you very much.
When they finally got down to business, both leaders turned on the charm.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be with a friend of mine, really for a long time now, if you think about it.
President Trump, it is a great pleasure for me as well to meet you. And it feels very warm seeing you again because it's been many years.
Under the agreement, the US will cut tariffs on Chinese goods linked to fentanyl to 10%, down from 20% previously. Beijing, meanwhile, agrees to crack down on the trade of the opioid. It also agrees to resume soybeans purchases and to keep rare earth exports flowing. The two sides also agreed to resolve issues around TikTok, which Washington wants to bring under US-controlled ownership. Vast differences remain, but easing tensions for now brings relief to countries entangled in the trade rivalry.
Right now, things seem to be on a somewhat positive track. Whether that will change in the near future, that's anybody's guess, right? But this is the pattern that we've seen in US-China relations.
Still, it was about as much as most could have hoped for, including President Trump himself.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? It was an outstanding group of decisions, I think, that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there.
China's foreign ministry later confirmed Trump would visit Beijing next year. Experts say some of the details around the agreements remain unclear for now. Future meetings between the two leaders could prove to be an important anchor for US-China ties. Patrick Falk, Arabiya, English.
For more on this, I'm joined by Derek Grossman, Professor of International Relations at the University of Southern California. Derek, always great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me today. So, talks between President Trump and Xi marked a breakthrough. Trump was pretty bullish, but there is still no ink on any paper. What do you make of the mood music following these talks?
Well, thanks for having me again. It's great to see you again. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's very typical of this second Trump administration to not really have anything written out, as you say, to have no joint statement or, to have a statement just from one side and not the other. So we'll have to kind of stay tuned for that to see if anything is codified. But I think that it's fair to say both leaders can walk away with what they wanted, right? So Trump wanted a deal on soybeans. He wanted Chinese action, further action on fentanyl ingredients. And he got those things, right? And Xi Jinping, I think, walked away from the meeting demonstrating that China is kind of a source of stability and predictability and, frankly, maturity, right, in this U.S.-China relationship. I mean, some of the things that Xi said, right, were very much about how, you know, great powers sometimes disagree, but we have to all get along on this great green earth, right? And that is, I think, in stark contrast to kind of the erratic nature of Trump's statements, not just in this administration, but in the past as well. So I think both got what they wanted, but we'll have to kind of see how it plays out in terms of substantive policy agreements.
So let's talk about that. The US and China have agreed to a one-year trade truce. You saying they both got what they wanted. But is this just a temporary measure to plaster over the deeper fundamental economic and geopolitical issues that the countries face?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have a meeting between Xi and Trump, right, or frankly, Xi and any future American president, I mean, there's still structural issues involved in this great power relationship that are not going to be resolved with one meeting. And that's why I, along with many others, have advocated that the US and China need to get back to having things like the strategic and economic dialogue, which actually existed back during the George W. Bush administration, right? So to have these constant senior level communications to ensure that any differences that may exist, and there are a lot, right, of course, are dealt with in a proper manner and do not escalate to the point where you have this tit-for-tat trade war on the economic side, or, you know, on the security side, have a major issue over Taiwan or in the South China Sea or something like that. So I think that more diplomacy, not less, is in order. That's not to say that all issues can be dealt with through diplomacy, but it certainly gives both sides a chance to resolve their differences peacefully.
And Donald Trump has floated the idea that he could possibly visit China next year. But Derek, as we know, the success of any deal is indeed in the delivery. But there was still no clarity on thornier issues like TikTok and Taiwan status. You just brought up Taiwan to me. What did you make of that? And also Russia, because Donald Trump had said that he would like China to help him when it comes to Russia.
Yeah, you know, it's so the meeting lasted for approximately 90 minutes. And out of those 90 minutes, at least from the public reports, it sounds like Taiwan was not mentioned at all, which I think is very curious. And I wonder if it's accurate. Again, 90-minute meetings, not that long, but it's also fairly long, right? So you would imagine at least a couple of minutes were devoted to Taiwan. Xi Jinping certainly wanted the U.S. to move away from its current policy of not supporting Taiwan independence to opposing Taiwan independence, and he's been pretty clear about that. So I'd imagine it did come up, it just hasn't been reported, but, you know, it's unclear how Trump responded to that. When he's been asked in the past, you know, how would you respond to such a demand or request from China? He said, I'm not going to answer that, right? And there's very few things that Trump does not talk about, right? So that's clearly a very sensitive issue in U.S. policy. And then, you know, in terms of China's support of Russia, they did, in fact, talk about that, probably at a pretty good length. And I think China's response was that, you know, we're going to try to see if there's any way that we can do maybe less with Russia, right, in terms of oil imports, but no firm commitments at all, right? And China has actually gone in the opposite direction, has been very supportive of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, especially in the area of selling dual-use equipment to Russia that could be used, you know, for drones and for other means of warfare against Ukraine. So I don't see that stopping anytime soon. In fact, I see their cooperation perhaps escalating as the conflict continues to escalate.
And I just want to talk to you a little bit about President Donald Trump, because he did do an impression of India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. How well is that going down?
Well, I don't know how well his impression actually maps with how Modi is in private. Okay, but let's put that aside for a moment, right? Doing impressions of world leaders is probably not a good idea because it's tantamount to making fun of them. And I think in the case of U.S.-India relations, this comes at a particularly sensitive moment. Trump over the summer took a wrecking ball to the relationship, as we've discussed in the past. And the US and India are only just now on the path toward recovering from that situation. I mean, this is kind of a longer story, right? But Trump, on a near daily basis, brings up the fact that he should win the Nobel Peace Prize because he ended the 4-day India-Pakistan war, which Modi and India staunchly disagree with that characterization of the events, right? And also, Trump met with Pakistani Field Marshal Asim Munir at the White House for a 2-hour closed-door meeting, and the Indians accuse him as being the mastermind behind the Pahalgam terrorist attack back in April, which actually precipitated the war in May, right? And there are many other reasons why the U.S.-India relationship is in serious trouble. So, doing these kinds of things right now, an impression of Modi doesn't help the situation at all.
Derek Grossman, always good to have your analysis. Thank you so much for your time with me this evening. Well, ahead of his meeting with President Xi today, Trump ordered the U.S. military to resume testing of nuclear weapons in order to keep up with countries like Russia and China. In a post on Truth Social, he said, "Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately." We're now joined by defense and security analyst Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's start with President Donald Trump. Is he launching a new nuclear arms race with the first U.S. tests in 33 years?
Yeah, that's a good place to start because we talk about our world getting more dangerous, not less. For this announcement to be made, 30 years since the last testing took place, on the anniversary, interestingly as well, of the Tsar bomb. This was the biggest nuclear test of a weapon ever done by the Soviets, far bigger than what we saw in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. And since then, there's been a test ban treaty agreed. So we're now seeing the unfolding of a new nuclear arms race with a third major player, that being China. But of course, other nations will now feel that they should join the club as well. I'm sure if you would ask Ukraine, they would have regretted relinquishing, their nuclear arsenal, because that's how you're made to feel safe nowadays. So what we're seeing is another element of a very disparate, very congested, very contested world get even more complicated as superpowers begin to rearm.
And Donald Trump is claiming that China is rapidly building its nuclear stockpiles, Tobias, citing this as one of the reasons to justify his decision. But what more do we know about China's nuclear program? Because we do know China is very secretive.
It is indeed, but it fits into a bigger picture that China's been pursuing indeed for years. It's always been China's vision for the last century to become stronger. They were humiliated, if you know the China's history of that century of humiliation of when countries, including America, Britain, Holland, France, and so on, took advantage of the weakness of China and actually saw the empire as it was collapse in the early 1900s, led to a civil war as well. Never again does China ever want to be open to be exploited in this way. And one of the ways they're preventing that is to build the largest army, air force, and navy in the world, to advance their capabilities in space, in cyber, and, as you say, to build a formidable nuclear arsenal. And they're actually on track to do exactly that, making, as I say, for a very, very dangerous world. The one good thing about the Cold War was the fact that there were these back channels. There were these conversations which said, listen, this is madness what we're doing. We can destroy the world not once, but many times over. And we haven't got back to that point. This generation has not got that Cold War statecraft an acumen and the back channel, the conversations to say, let's keep this in check. Let's consider what we're doing, because by accident, things could escalate so quickly and get out of control.
Tobias, you're just talking about back-channel conversations there that we don't have, that they did have in the Cold War. But we did see President Donald Trump meeting with Xi Jinping. Do you think these conversations would be coming up about the likes of nuclear weapons, nuclear testing?
Well, it's such an important question, because having the biggest superpowers in our world that don't get on talking to each other must be a good thing. So that absolutely should be welcomed. But when you saw the readouts from both sides, you actually realized an awful lot of the detail wasn't discussed, was actually parked. You know, Taiwan, what's going to happen over that, for example. So we hear another meeting is planned. This is, I think, good news for global order. But at the core of the challenge that we face here, what's causing our world to feel more dangerous, is that both America and China have very, very different visions as to where they see the world advancing. And to make it even more complicated, Europe and America now are diverging as well. So lots to discuss in April. I think it's going to take place if we are to avoid what will be a greater clash in the latter part of this century.
And we can't forget, in the last week or so, Russia has successfully tested a nuclear-powered missile and an underwater drone. Are US rivals China and Russia posing a nuclear challenge to Washington? Is this now, Tobias, a reality for Donald Trump?
Well, this is where the focus on Ukraine we've spoken about many times. We seem to lose the challenge here, that it's not just Russia that we're dealing with, it's China sitting behind Russia, providing all the material, providing the microchips, providing that necessary support to allow the war to continue. So we don't have a geopolitical strategy that recognizes that China and Russia are very much as one. They are working together against our global order, as I said earlier, and it's a complicated approach to perhaps split the two apart, if that's even possible. But at the moment, we are thinking so short term. We don't have that long-term vision that both Russia and China tend to look at the world. That's why decades ago, it was China that determined that it was going to focus on rare earth minerals. They now process much of the world's rare earth capability, and they own the mines as well across Africa and elsewhere. We've been very slow to pick up the important aspects of what keeps our economy going, and China has taken full advantage of that. This is the heart of what needs to be discussed, because there is a symbiotic relationship that's required. America leans on China to some degree. China leans on America as well. But China is now realizing, as time goes on, perhaps, just perhaps, it can survive without China. And that then takes us to a very, very dangerous point in global affairs indeed. And
just your personal perspective here, do you think Donald Trump's doing the right thing to protect the US by starting to test nuclear? If we look at it in the landscape that you're presenting, if we look further forward to China and domination?
Well, it's that old adage, you know, you speak softly but carry a big stick, and this is, the big sticks don't get bigger than this. I'm not sure it's the only avenue you need to pursue. The way you stand up to strength and is certainly not appeasing the bully, and that's what we're seeing America do with Russia. And the way you stand up to China is by collectively working together. So the rest of the world working together. You add the GDP of all the EU and the G7 nations, it amounts to more than what China has. China's Achilles heel, if you like, compared with the Cold War, is that it needs to trade with the rest of the world. Now, if the rest of the world determine the terms in which fair trade can take place, which we've not done because China has rides roughshod over the World Trade Organization rules. If we start to enforce that with a bit of security, then we set the parameters as to how the 21st century should unfold. If we don't, China will pursue its vision as to where the world should go, collecting more and more countries in its One Belt, One Road program. And as I say, that takes us to a very dangerous place indeed.
And According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, we talked about this earlier, the global nuclear weapons stockpile is indeed growing across the world. You mentioned treaties, but what does this mean for nuclear and arms controls treaties that are in place? Are they almost void?
They are indeed, and that's what makes the world so dangerous. And it isn't just major states that are developing nuclear missiles now. There's also non-state actors that are going to soon be able to harness this capability and develop very, very small bombs or dirty bombs as well. And then, of course, as I touched on earlier, any small nation, any nation in the Middle East, you can see why Iran wants the weapon itself, because it will be used as a deterrent. And unless you're in a big club like NATO, people will then look to procure a nuclear weapon to be able to fend off potential adversaries. And this does make our world much, much more dangerous. We've not had a nuclear weapon used in anger since the Second World War. And once even a small one is used, we then cross that threshold. Where does the world then go? And this is the back channels, the importance of getting those treaties sorted, getting Russia, China, and America as a starting point round the table. But boy, we're far off from ever that happening in the near future.
Yes, indeed. Tobias, Ellwood, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for talking to me this evening. The Dutch centrist Liberal Party D66 and the far-right Freedom Party are currently in a neck-and-neck election race. So far, about 99% of the votes are counted, and both parties are heading for 26 seats in the 150-member parliament. That's according to a projection from one Dutch news agency. This close race comes after initial exit polls put 38-year-old Robert Jetten in the lead. For more on this, I'm joined from Amsterdam by journalist Fernand van Tietz. Fernand, thank you so much for joining me this evening. First of all, take us through the latest results. Right now, it appears to be a real cliffhanger.
Indeed, the biggest cliffhanger this country has ever seen. It has never been this close. Throughout the day, results have been trickling in, and this balance of power between these two parties has shifted. Earlier today, it seemed the PVV would actually be coming out on top. Now, as the votes from Amsterdam, a big city, have come in, D66 is 15,000 votes ahead, but there's still votes from abroad to be counted and votes from the south where the PVV is very strong. So we'll have to see. The final result will not be known until the end of Monday, which is unprecedented in the Dutch elections. Usually this goes much faster. And there's even talk about potentially a recount. Geert Wilders has said that he wants to be 100% sure who came out on top before moving forward to the next part of this process. Now, in Dutch politics, that usually means that the party that has become the biggest will get to appoint someone who will feel out other parties to see what kind of coalitions are possible. And of course, who that will be, who gets to appoint that person, will have a huge impact on the process going forward.
A lot to wait for still, but Rob Jetten, who's the leader of the centrist Liberal Party, D66, has said other countries in Europe can learn from this, which I find really interesting because we have seen a rise of the right to politics across Europe. But what's the playbook? What's he getting at here?
So for actually the last few weeks, it looked as if the PVV, with their strong anti-immigrant message, was going to win again, as they did in 2023. Asylum and immigration was at the top of the agenda. He was polling in first place. But D66 really mounted a remarkable campaign based on positivity. They had an anthem, "Yes, we can," in Dutch, "It is possible." And they really had this campaign of positivity. They also reclaimed nationalism. There were a lot of Dutch flags flying at their event last night when I was there. They were handed out. Also, when he kicked off his campaign, there was a big Dutch flag behind him. Now, of course, the flag was something that had been claimed by the right. Nationalism was something that had been claimed by the right. And he said, no, we are proud of our country. And also just the simple language that Geert Wilders has used to great effect. He's always played it very straight with voters. And Jetten did so too. He was very frank about what he intended to do. And also immigration, he he did shift a little bit to the right. He said, people who are not behaving in the way that we expect them, they should be able to be sent out. So if you have not gotten a status, for example, if you've applied for asylum, we should be able to get rid of you as soon as possible. So it seems he went on a listening tour of the country. He listened to people and responded by doing that. But also, he's young. He's from a new generation. As you said, he's 38. If he becomes prime minister, he will be the youngest prime minister this country has ever seen. And also, I might add, the first openly gay prime minister. And just his energy and his youth really shone through it. Dutch election campaigns are always fought out mostly in TV debates. TV debates are extremely important, especially those taking place in the last 2 weeks. So actually, a campaign here is usually around 3 weeks, and the last week or so is really, really crucial. And Geert Wilders actually dropped out one of these debates because he said there was a threat to his life. That left a spot open for Jette, and he just grabbed it and ran with it. He did really well, and that really placed him on the map for many, many voters with his message of positivity, which was very different to what other parties were going for. So I think a message of positivity, saying what you can do, and it helps that he had these opportunities. There's always a bit of luck in winning political campaigns, and Rob Jette had some of that as well.
As you said, he had lots of energy going into this campaign. But the big question now is, what does this mean for the far right and Geert Wilders, who actually pulled the plug on his own coalition back in July? So he's pretty much out of favor too when it comes to building a coalition.
Absolutely. So Geert Wilders brought down the government in June, saying that he presented this asylum plan. They didn't want to go along with it. But other parties have said, we cannot work with this man. He's been in power twice, in 2012 and now this last government run of 11 months. And once the going gets tough, he quits, is what other parties say. So they feel no reason to work with him again. Everyone is aching for some stability. We've had 3 elections in the last 4 years. And so other parties, the 4 major parties that follow behind him, have said there is no way that they are working together again with Geert Wilders. That said, I don't think we can discount the right. I mean, this is a neck-and-neck race between 2 very different blocs. The PVV, of course, very hard right. And he's not the only party that is hard right anymore in the Netherlands. If you look at other parties, actually the hard right bloc has around 42 seats in the 150-seat parliament, according to these latest results. Geert Wilders' major achievement over the past 20 years that he's been on the scene is that not only has he had other parties be created which also toe his line, but he has actually managed to move the migration debate very much over to the right in general. So, of course, we're now talking about this optimistic story of D66, and that is, I think, the biggest story of this election, the real game changer. But we cannot forget that the right still had a strong showing in the Netherlands. The only thing is that they just will not be able to form a coalition because Geert Wilders, who has the numbers, who could get together the numbers, is being excluded by other parties. So that means that the path to government for him is done. I mean, he had this opportunity, of course. He was the biggest last time round. He went into those negotiations, and voters are saying, you didn't deliver. You had power. You had absolute power. And that also was a real shift in the campaign because Geert Wilders is someone who became big as an opposition leader. He's very good at that. He's very good at pointing out what other people are doing wrong. This time round, of course, he was in the position that he had been in power and people could say, what have you done about it? So when he was complaining about the lack of action on asylum, people could say, well, the asylum minister came from your party, but she didn't manage to get any legislation through the parliament. You had your chance and you wasted it. And that is a position that he was really uncomfortable in. You could see that in the debates. It's something he's not used to. He's not good at. He came across as a little bit grumpy sometimes, responding to snipes. And so he was really on the defensive rather than the offensive, which is not his role. But I think when looking at this result, we shouldn't forget that the Dutch scene also still has a very large segment of voters who did go for this far right vote. And they do have, as a bloc, 43 seats in parliament, but just not enough to actually govern.
So what happens now? This is the question. Who's going to be the next leader? What kind of coalition could be formed? How long could it take? Fernand, there's so many questions that are still unanswered.
Absolutely. So Dutch coalition building is a long-term process. I mean, everyone was saying we hope to have a new government by Christmas. I don't think anyone thinks that will happen. Also, we have elections for municipal elections in March. So if it's not done before then, again, things get a bit tricky. There's actually only one very clear majority to form of 4 parties. There's 15 different parties in parliament right now. If you want to form a coalition with 4 different parties, there's only one option, which is D66, and then the Christian Democrats, the VVD Liberals, and the Green Left Alliance. And that is the combination that Tobias has said he would like to try for. They would have a majority of 86 seats, so a solid majority. However, the Liberals have campaigned throughout this process that they will never join a coalition with the left. They've excluded Geert Wilders, but they've also excluded the left. So they will have to come back on their word in order for that to work. They are hoping for a centrist right coalition, as they call it. However, that coalition of the Christian Democrats, D66, the Liberals, and a party called Ja 21, which is kind of similar to Geert Wilders, but packaged a bit more smoothly, they would only get to 75 seats right now, which is not a majority. So they would need another party, a 5th party, to join in order to work. And, you know, with the scene being so fragmented, the more parties you need, the harder it is to keep everyone together. So the more parties you add to the fray, the more complicated it gets, and the longer also the coalition building gets. So this is the beginning of a very long process. We will have to see next week, not tomorrow as would be usual, but because of this vote being so disputed, only next week there will be someone appointed who will start to feel out what coalitions will be possible. But yes, last time it took 7 months. The time before that, it took 11 months to form a government. So I think this is something that we will have to keep an eye on for many months to come. And I think the chances of there being a government before 2026 are extremely slim.
Fernand Van Tetz, you've got your work cut out for you if it's going to take 7 months to form a coalition. But thank you so much for joining us. Now, police in Paris have arrested 5 more suspects in the region as part of their investigation into the Louvre heist. Paris public prosecutor made the announcement this morning. It means there's now been 7 arrests over the incident that made headlines around the world. However, the stolen items still haven't been recovered. For more on this, I'm joined by our Paris correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thank you so much for joining us. So I think you are, looks beautiful where you are. I was going to say, is that the Louvre? But it's clearly not. First of all, let's get on to more arrests have been made today. What do we know about the suspects?
Well, good evening, Leigh-Ann. It is a wonderful evening here in the centre of Paris. You might be able to see the moon as well. That's been rising over the last few minutes. The lights have just come on here at the Louvre Museum. You can see the famous pyramid here behind me. The Eiffel Tower is all lit up just over to my left. We have had an update from the Paris prosecutor about the heist that took place here 11 days ago. We know that 5 more people have been arrested at 9 p.m. last night, so Wednesday night local time, including one of the principal suspects. Paris prosecutors saying that they had him a target in their sights, so they're very satisfied to be able to have arrested one of the men they believe who was actually present at the heist when it took place on the 19th of October, and law enforcement will now have 96 hours to question those 5 people who've been arrested before they decide whether to release them or to charge them.
So, Ross, outside the beautiful Louvre, of course, I've been there, should know better. So, basically, we know that 4 men carried out this audacious heist. It appears 3 of the ringleaders have been arrested, but 1 is basically still at large. Are French authorities doing enough to track down these criminals?
Well, you might remember that earlier in the week there were 2 other men who were arrested, Leigh-Ann, 34 and 39, the ages of those 2 men. And after their period of questioning came to an end, Paris prosecutors decided to formally charge them. So they've been charged with robbery and placed in pre-trial detention for a court case at a later date. Then you have the 5 who were arrested on Wednesday. So certainly Paris prosecutors believe that they are doing well in terms of their attempts to round up the suspects, round up people who are involved involved, round up people who are actually here on the 19th of October. But that, of course, is only one part of the investigation.
So jewels worth $102 million were stolen from the Louvre in broad daylight nearly 2 weeks ago. But where are they, Ross? Is there any sign of them or any idea what possibly could have happened?
Yeah, you're right, Leigh-Ann. That's the second part of the investigation. Where are the gemstones? Now, the Paris police do have a special department that deals with stolen artwork and stolen jewels, and so they'll be bringing all of their knowledge and resources to try to find those missing jewels. They have recovered one tiara that seems to have been dropped by the robbers in their haste to get away. They managed to steal some of the crown jewels of France and then back onto waiting motorbikes and make their getaway. They dropped a tiara that's being assessed right now for the damage inflicted upon it by being dropped onto the cobbles you can see here in Paris. But we're trying to track and trace those gemstones, also looking at areas where they might have been sent to. Antwerp is a big port in Belgium. It's known as the diamond capital of Europe for both the legal trade in gemstones and sometimes the illegal trade, contraband, rare stones moving through that port. They'll be looking at other ports like Hamburg in Germany and Rotterdam in Netherlands, because the race is on to try to find those jewels before they are potentially broken up and distributed around the world.
Is the Louvre, which is the world's most visited museum, doing anything to improve its security at all, Ross?
Now, the Louvre is not just the world's most visited museum, it is the world's biggest museum, Leigh-Ann, extending all the way around and down that way as well, a former royal palace here in the centre of the French capital. But the director of the museum, her name is Laurence Decars, and she's been in post since 2021 and has been warning for years that she feels the monitoring systems, the alarms, the CCTV infrastructure is not up to date, is not fit for purpose, and in fact the robbers did identify a blind spot where there was no CCTV to be able to carry out their heist in broad daylight, while there were thousands of visitors here inside the museum viewing the artworks on the 19th of October. And we know that some of the jewels have now been sent from the Louvre to the Bank of France, to its vault some 26 metres underground, because that is seen as a safer place to store gemstones than here at the biggest and most visited museum in the world, Leigh-Ann.
Ross, I'm sure this will become a Netflix series at some point, but Ross Cullen, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Israel's army says Hamas has handed over 2 coffins with remains of hostages to the Red Cross in Gaza. Hamas had previously returned the remains of 15 hostages since the start of the ceasefire. Earlier this week, Israel gave permission to an Egyptian technical team to go and work with the Red Cross in order to help locate the bodies. At least 34 people have been killed after Hurricane Melissa has devastated parts of the Caribbean. 8 of the deaths were recorded in Jamaica, 1 in the Dominican Republic and 25 in Haiti. The UK has pledged £2.5 million in emergency aid and will charter flights to help British nationals leave Jamaica, whilst President Donald Trump committed to supplying humanitarian aid. US lawmakers are calling on President Donald Trump to intervene in the Sudan conflict after the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces seized new territory. The Republicans and Democrats want the US to designate the RSF as a foreign terrorist organization. The UN said tens of thousands of people have been killed and about 13 million displaced since the start of the war in 2023. A reminder of our top stories. Tensions between the US and China appear to ease as Trump cuts tariffs and gives his meeting with President Xi a 12 out of 10. Meanwhile, Trump orders the US military to resume testing of nuclear weapons in order to keep up with countries like Russia and China. Exit polls predict Rob Jetten, who's the leader of the Dutch centrist Liberal Party D66, is on track to become the next Prime Minister of the Netherlands. 5 more people have been arrested in connection with the Louvre jewellery heist during multiple raids across Paris. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.